Contrary to popular belief and just the way that things happen, Oklahoma State will beat Texas on Saturday. I'm confident. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from ESPN Central Texas. That is Marshall Scott of Pistols Firing. And today, we are going to convince you that Oklahoma State, who has been so good and consistent this season, can and possibly will beat Texas on Saturday in the Big 12 Championship. Thank you for making Locked On Big 12 your first listen every single day. Marshall, it's on paper, it's not pretty, but there has to be some sort of way that Alan Bowman, Ollie Gordon and company can get it done against Texas on Saturday. Is there a possibility here?
I mean, if we're talking on paper, after Oklahoma State's 2-2 start, no way they make it to this game. So I guess in that area, you could say this team is, it's full of surprises this year, both good and bad. In reality, though, it to me feels like, on Friday Night Lights, the movie, which is a little eerie considering how the Big 12 championship game with Oklahoma State and Baylor ended.
Again, they did lose. Permian did lose at the end of the movie.
Yeah. So, but it kind of feels like Oklahoma State is Permian.
Yeah.
Texas is Dallas Carter, just like the size difference. They're talking about how, so it's, to me, that's kind of what this game feels like. And as you mentioned, that movie doesn't end well for the Permian Panthers, but maybe, they didn't have Boobie Miles, aka Ollie Gordon, and I'll stop making these comparisons now.
Yeah. Give me if we're going like a sell me why here, away from the movie references, remember the Titans, Rudy, there are a lot of, we can throw out a lot here. Big underdogs, double digit, 2 touchdown under, and it continues to grow. Is it establish the run game? Is it try to exploit holes in the Texas secondary? Is there a tangible way instead of just maybe a miracle factor that Oklahoma State actually wins?
Well, one thing I'll be really interested in is teams to this point have loaded the box to try and stop Ollie Gordon. And that makes sense. That's, what I would do if I was playing Oklahoma State. I wonder if Texas thinks their run defense is good enough anyways, that maybe they don't bring that extra guy or two into the box. And then if that's the case, maybe Oklahoma State's, line blocking schemes are like, whoa, we haven't had to do this in a long time where we've just blocking the number of guys. And then, but maybe Texas can stop OSU. That's how good that, that defensive front in particular is. So that's kind of interesting to me is, are they going to commit as many bodies to stopping Ollie Gordon as possible? And if not, can they adjust on the fly? And will those, guys be comfortable coming into the box? And then, on the other end of that is, if there is a weakness to Texas, it is the pass defense, kind of like you mentioned. Are they going to load the box? Is that going to worsen that? And then in that case, you're kind of asking Alan Bowman to beat you, which if I was Texas again, I think that's how I would want to go about it if I was Texas. But, guys like Leon Johnson's been really good. Rashad Owens has had really good games. Brendan Presley was unstoppable against Houston, which it's Houston, it's not Texas. So those are kind of ways that I'm interested in seeing just how Texas plays it defensively. And, I think there is a world where they get that totally wrong and Oklahoma State kind of hangs around longer than Texas wants them to. But, as you mentioned, I think that Texas is and should be the heavy favorite in this game.
Now, I would have said the same thing between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma, the better team on paper by probably 10. You play that a neutral site game on any given Saturday, and Oklahoma's favored by 10. They beat Texas outright. For Oklahoma State, against Texas last year, that's a better Texas team than what Oklahoma State threw out there that just couldn't seem to find a way to be consistent, had to learn to win, and you're seeing the results of that this year. Is there any mention in Oklahoma State's fears of the OU game this year, the Texas game last year, as examples of games where, look, a Mike Gundy coach team is really good at doing the opposite of whatever makes sense?
Yeah, kind of what's interesting about that is Quinn Ewers had a horrible game in Stillwater last season.
So bad.
Completed 39% of his passes. That's his lowest career completion percentage. Threw 3 interceptions. He's only had one other game with multiple interceptions. It was 2 against OU this year. So maybe there's some weird read that they have on Quinn Ewers. I imagine that was more so just a freshman playing, in a hostile environment and things like that. So maybe there's something schematically that Oklahoma State kind of has a feeling about Texas. They've won 9 of the last 13, I believe, against the Longhorns.
Which is kind of nuts.
Yeah, Mike Gundy kind of has Texas in his pocket right now. But, this Oklahoma State team, talent-wise, isn't at the level of some of those other teams that he's, had. but maybe they just are better. And I think a lot of it goes into these games that, Texas didn't offer a bunch of these Oklahoma State players, and they always kind of get fired up. There's a lot of Texas players obviously on the roster. They always get fired up playing Texas. So I wonder if he's able to kind of use that. To us, he just kind of says we're focusing on the game plan. This is a different team than last year, things like that. But I kind of wonder what factors those play into this game. But again, I think I'll end every one of my statements with saying Texas should win this game. They are much better on paper than Oklahoma State.
Okay. Established the pistols firing guy who's the big Oklahoma State guy and covers the team. Yes, you've given me the objective journalist side. Oklahoma State wins this game. How did it happen?
I think Ollie Gordon is going to New York if Oklahoma State wins this game. I think he goes.
Stop! Please help me believe. I just want to believe, Marshall.
Well, I think he gets loose. He shakes loose. He runs for 200 plus yards. He runs for 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And if that happens, Texas is in trouble. Things aren't going well for Texas. The Oklahoma State defense during that 5-game winning streak that they had was really good at turning teams over. The defense hasn't been great all year. They've been good. They've been solid. They've been really good in second halves of games. So if Quinn Ewers throws a pick or two, if Ollie Gordon gets rolling and Texas doesn't really know how to adjust to stop it, then things get really interesting. If Oklahoma State can kind of control the pace, I think that's how Oklahoma State wins this game.
I would argue, and this is a fickle argument because it's tough to prove. There's nothing really tangible for it. I would argue that Oklahoma State has a worse roster than Kansas State. I would argue that a couple of these games that Oklahoma State has won, Oklahoma being another one of those, they have a worse roster. The Kansas game, a healthy Kansas, is probably better than Oklahoma State on paper, at least. That's what the Cowboys keep doing, is winning games that on paper they should lose, or via the spread they should lose. How? Why? What is it about this Mike Gundy coach team that it's beaten so many teams that they're not supposed to beat?
I think that it is Mike Gundy. I think, that's kind of consistent throughout his tenure. I think in a lot of cases, like if it comes down to who's going to coach better, Mike Gundy or Steve Sarkisian, I think a lot of fans around the country will take Mike Gundy in that battle because, his teams are disciplined. The last couple of weeks, they've had a couple of weird special teams things, but usually they're really good at special teams. He mentioned he was raving about Texas special teams earlier this week. So, maybe it's kind of neutral there, but he always finds a way, and it's something that we probably don't see right now, but if he can exploit something and he can go after it, I think he's going to. So, kind of if Oklahoma State's going to win this game, it's going to be Mike Gundy, kind of willing that team and finding a way to beat Steve Sarkisian.
From Ollie Gordon to Alan Bowman to everything that Oklahoma State has done against teams they're not supposed to beat, I have confidence in Mike Gundy alone. I take all the other stuff out of it and say Mike Gundy has been in so many spots where you just thought, oh, Mike Gundy's going to win this game, and he loses it. Oh, Mike Gundy's going to lose this game, and he wins it. Whatever makes sense with Mike Gundy is probably not going to happen, a la UCF game, a la Alabama, South Alabama game. And in this one, I am relying on the Mike Gundy factor for the reason that I think that Oklahoma State will beat Texas on Saturday, which, by the way, I have nothing to lose in saying that. So I am going to go with the Cowboys on Saturday. Marshall, I want to get your thoughts on what it would mean for Oklahoma State to win a Big 12 championship this week. But first, let's hear from Prize Picks right here on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is where I go for it's just like my little side way of making added income. I think there's a word for that. But I go in, I know ball-ish. I go in and I have 2 little Prize Pick parlays where I take a stat here and a stat there. Say LeBron James, Travis Kelce, over 10.5 receptions plus 3-pointers combined. Bam, it hits and I have money. I don't even have to know a ton of ball. I just put 2 things in a little pot, mix them together. Some of these player props, bam, money on the other side of this. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy, so your entries that stay in play if your player gets hurt in the first half. If they don't come back in the second half, you're rebooted entirely. Insured. They're the only ones to do insurance out there in the daily fantasy prize games. Prize Picks, I put in $25, I get $200. Feels like a pretty good bet to me. At prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege, you get a deposit match of $100. Prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. Use code LockedOnCollege first deposit match up to $100 at Prize Picks. Go make money. It's what I do. You can do it too at prizepicks.com. All right, Marshall, what would an Oklahoma State Big 12 championship game win over Texas mean to the program?
I think it would mean an immense amount, not only for the program, but for the conference. This is, Mike Gundy didn't want to get into this post game against BYU or Monday at his press conference, but the Big 12 is better if Oklahoma State wins this game, if the Big 12 championship trophy stays in Big 12 country. As for the program, I think it would mean a ton. Everybody's kind of talked about since, the OU Texit kind of who's going to be the next bell cows of the league. It looked like Oklahoma State was in a pretty good spot to do that as early as 2021, alongside Baylor. And then last year did not go great. The end of last season happened the way that it did. But if they could, roll this momentum into not only beating Oklahoma this year, but beating Texas, sending them both to the SEC and saying Oklahoma State is the champion of the Big 12. Yeah. I think that could go a long way for the program in terms of NIL. That's, obviously huge nowadays. And it would mean a great deal, I imagine, to Brett Yormark and the Big 12 offices.
For a guy like Mike Gundy to get a Big 12 championship game win under his belt, what does that mean? Because there was a point in time after that South Alabama game where you're hearing murmurs from fans of, oh my gosh, this guy's been here so long, and it's just that hump that for a decade now that Oklahoma State hasn't been able to get over. This feels different. I mean, here he is again proving so many people wrong. Yeah,
and the two things that have kind of gotten held over Mike Gundy's head in terms of the national perspective and things along that nature is, Bedlam winning percentage, which is still not great, but he beat OU in 21. He beat OU this past season. It's going to be the last game for who knows how long.
Eternal scoreboard.
And then the fact that he's got one conference trophy. It came in 2011. A part of that is part of both of those things is that OU has been, even for OU standards, historically great over the last 15-ish years. So then A, hard to win Bedlam games against OU, and then B, hard to win conference championships when they won 6 in a row or whatever it was. Yeah. So this would mean a great deal to his resume. I already think he's a college football Hall of Famer. That was kind of scoffed at as early as 7 years ago. For Mike Gundy, but just the consistency that he's won and where he has won at, Oklahoma State's not always been, what it is right now. So if he does that, then it's even more cemented that's kind of going to be his resume. So yeah, this he's not ever going to say it, but this would mean a great deal, I imagine, to Mike Gundy.
And when you mentioned the Big 12, this is Oklahoma State carrying the Big 12 on its back. The rest of the teams, now that Texas and OU have left, are rooting for the Cowboys this week. Is there that sense of urgency to win for the conference from you? I know you said that Gundy won't say it outright, but do you feel it from the fan base?
Absolutely. And I there's some funny tweets gone out there today that, OSU should almost just wear the Big 12 logo on its helmet, which I think would be sweet. It obviously, if they got hammered, it would not look very good. And in the same way, Mike Gundy, if he were to, say, yeah, this is Big 12 versus SEC, and then they get drilled on Saturday, then that's not great. But maybe after the game, if they are able to find a way to win this game, I imagine he'll take some time to kind of talk about how big this is for the conference moving forward. And you got Utah coming in, who's their fans seem about as confident as UCF fans, which we saw how that went for UCF, but I think Utah's in probably a bit better of a spot. So I think there's going to be some teams out there. The Big 12 is going to be a fun league moving forward, just in terms of parity. That might not be great for the national perception of the league, that it doesn't have a Michigan or Ohio State or an Alabama or Georgia or things like that. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun moving forward. And if they can send the SEC out on a pair of losses, controversial or otherwise, and if you thought the noise was loud for the pass interference that should have been called in Bedlam, holy crap, every flag that is thrown against Texas on Saturday is going to be put under a microscope. But, if they can send those two schools out on a loss, it'll be huge.
Oklahoma State already has that eternal scoreboard that I mentioned over OU, and they had given OU this feeling of hope with the 18-point BYU comeback. Oklahoma's on the cusp of a Red River rematch, and in beautiful just F-you to your rival fashion, Oklahoma State pulls it away and wins that game against BYU. And now you have an opportunity to cement a guy like Alan Bowman in Oklahoma State lore, which I didn't see coming, especially when he committed. It's like, oh, geez, how is this going to go? This guy was an assistant coach at Michigan for the last 2 years, effectively. And here he is with Ollie Gordon. You mentioned Brendan Presley. What would this team go down as? What would their moniker be in Oklahoma State history if they pull it off Saturday?
Yeah, just to talk Alan Bowman for a little bit. He's such a good dude, and I know that he hasn't been the greatest. He's not Mason Rudolph-esque. He's not Brandon Whedon. But if he wins this game on Saturday, it's going to be him and Brandon Whedon who have Big 12 titles. Mason Rudolph wasn't able to do that. So it kind of reminds me of Taylor Cornelius was very polarizing in 2018 of the Oklahoma State fan base. He stays the extra year that he got. He backed up Mason Rudolph his entire tenure. And then he comes in and some people wanted them to start a freshman Spencer Sanders to kind of get that going right away. And other people were like, hey, this guy's waited his turn. And he was a 2-point conversion away from beating Kyler Murray in Oklahoma in Norman. And I just kind of think of how different people would have thought of Taylor Cornelius had he completed that 2-point conversion. And that's kind of the area that Alan Bowman's in right now. And I think people are, happy with Alan Bowman. I think a lot of people want him to come back another year, which is a possibility somehow.
28-year-old Alan Bowman, Brandon Whedon-esque.
Yes. So if he can win this game, this is huge. This is putting him deep in the lore of Oklahoma State quarterbacks. This is putting him right up there with some of those guys that I mentioned before, and that's kind of crazy to think about. He obviously starts his career at Tech, has some really weird injuries. Then all of a sudden, Tech is just supplying quarterbacks around the country to people. You think of Donovan Smith, and you got Alan Bowman here. So this would be huge for Alan Bowman. It would be huge for this team in general. It's so weird because this hasn't really ever happened before, that a team that on paper isn't all that great is all of a sudden potentially going down as one of the most heralded teams in program history. Yeah, if they can find a way to win this game. So I honestly don't know what people will think about this team if they look back 10 years from now. But for us who have lived it, it'll be a lot of fun.
Given the lack of expectation preseason, and then parlaying that the transfer portal turmoil of the offseason parlayed into now a Big 12 championship, I do think that speaks so much to Mike Gundy in this conversation and what it would add to his career, his resume, and his standing in the Big 12. And I wonder if it makes him the best coach in the Big 12. Marshall, let's go there next. But first, we hear from our friends over at LinkedIn. This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. LinkedIn Talent Solutions is where you go to find the right hire for your job. LinkedIn.com/LockedOnCollege. I hire an intern every semester. I go to the colleges. I say, hey, do you have an intern? And the way that I do it, I send them a LinkedIn profile, LinkedIn link where I can find the right candidates and fast to interview them quickly and get the job hiring process out of the way as fast as possible. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It has a vast network, more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It's super easy to use. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and they want to help you. The process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making this even quicker. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnCollege. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free. LinkedIn.com. Keep in mind that terms and conditions do apply. Let's keep it simple here, Marshall. Is Mike Gundy the best coach in the Big 12?
I think yes. And kind of going back to the SEC Big 12 conversation, I'm not sure that the Big 12, there's a more recognizable face outside of Oklahoma and Texas in terms of the Big 12 than Mike Gundy. So I think yes. I think Lance Leipold has a chance to kind of upend that, but I would have said the same thing about Dave Aranda a couple years ago. That he's on his way. Chris Kleiman, same kind of thing as Leipold. But I feel like so many have come. You think about Matt Campbell. He was really hot to kind of start his Iowa State career, and then it kind of cools off. And now I'm not sure anybody's really thinking Matt Campbell over Mike Gundy. So I think I'm going to go with yes.
I don't think this game it obviously can't change it, because if you lose, Mike Gundy's still at the apex of the conference. They lost to Texas and they're leaving. If he wins, then he's already number one and he stays number one. Does this make Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy, then the team of the future, the team to beat moving forward in the conference? Because remember, we said a lot of that about Baylor 2 years ago. We said a lot about Kansas State and especially TCU last year. And all three of those programs, none of them represent the Big 12 like Oklahoma is doing on Saturday.
Yeah, I think that Oklahoma State would kind of be in the driver's seat in that, but I think parity is going to kind of rule the world. You kind of look at what Arizona's done over the last month or so. They've been really good. Yeah. Utah's obviously always been really good. I think Kansas State's going to stay up there and continue to contend. Kansas is going to get Jalen Daniels back. When's Kansas really going to take that next step? They're now like a contributing member to society in the Big 12. But kind of when are they going to take that next step under Leipold? So I think Oklahoma State will be in the driver's spot. And in terms of, which team is going to kind of be the team that you think of when you think of the Big 12. But I think parity is going to, rule the day whenever, it comes to it, because that's just kind of been the Big 12's MO over the last 5 years.
I know we're so far away from it, too. We used to be able to tell pretty easily where a team would be a year or two down the line, because you say, we have this many young guys. But now it's transfer portal. Who's coming in, who's going out. It's going to happen for everybody in the league. For Oklahoma State, what is that outlook? And maybe the better question is, no matter the outlook, as long as Gundy's the head coach, will there always be an Oklahoma State at the top of the conference?
I think so, because even you look at last year and the mass exodus of players that entered the portal. You had starters everywhere, and a bunch of the outside perception was this team got worse through the transfer portal. And there are certainly guys, John Paul Richardson, who I think is going by JP Richardson now at TCU. He would have done really well at Oklahoma State this year. Jabbar Muhammad's a stud corner at Washington right now. Thomas Harper, he's starting at Notre Dame. So those are definitely guys that
Dominic Richardson, excuse me.
Yeah, I think Dominic Richardson. I loved Dominic Richardson, but Ollie Gordon is the dude right now. So but I think a lot of people thought, okay, this team got worse because they're bringing in a Leon Johnson from George Fox in the Division III rank. They're bringing in a Texas State tackle. But I think a lot of Oklahoma State is guys who want to be there, and Gundy's kind of alluded that over time. And I think that just kind of it's not for everybody. But I think that's what works for Mike Gundy. I don't know if he had a bunch of 5-star dudes, if Mike Gundy would be the same type of coach. I think he invites those, kind of blue collar, hardworking type dudes that really want to be where they're at. I think that's kind of where Mike Gundy's at his best. And that's going to frustrate the heck out of the fan base sometimes when they're not going after these big names. But, if he continues to get those type of kids in, you think of a Malcolm Rodriguez, who was basically a nobody as a high school prospect, comes in as a safety and then develops into one of the best linebackers they've had, since the turn of the century. That's the same thing is happening with Nicholas Martin, who's got 120 tackles. He's leading the Big 12 by 18 tackles.
Double digits, yeah. And he came out of absolutely nowhere this year. Like I didn't expect him to start this year. I knew of his existence, but he really came out of nowhere. So I think Mike Gundy and his staff just know what they need to kind of fit. And I think they do that. They know who they are more than I think anybody around the country. Lifetime contract?
It's already kind of there. It's a 4-year rolling thing. There were some people in our forum this week that were saying like, hey, Mike Gundy's done a great job this year, but I still think that the lifetime contract, the rolling contract needs to come to an end. I think Mike Gundy's going to coach at Oklahoma State as long as he wants to coach at Oklahoma State. Yeah. I think he's earned that right, honestly. But yeah, lifetime contracts, they're definitely a little dicey no matter what the place or the person.
Ask TCU. They've got the statue sitting on campus of Gary Patterson, who might just be in the Big 12 come here soon. So with all that said, Texas, Oklahoma State on Saturday in the Big 12 championship. Marshall, I know you and your team are covering it very closely. Where can folks find your work?
Yeah, you can find us at pistolsfiringblog.com. And then on Twitter, we're at Pistols Guys.
There you go. That's Marshall Scott. Marshall, thanks for joining Locked On Big 12.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
For all you out there, thanks for making Locked On Big 12 your first listen every single day. Come back tomorrow. Robbie Trujillo is going to be on the show. Break down best bets across the country and in the Big 12, as well as transfer portal news. This has been and always will be. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Locked On Dose Grande.